Hello there, Blender heads. Chris P here. The other day, one of my subscribers asked how to create the back of a Redmi K20 Pro smartphone. So I looked at a couple of videos about that phone on YouTube and thought that that crazy, shiny, shimmery surface would actually be a great challenge. And perfect to play with materials in EEVEE, which I like to do. So I created a first version and posted that on my channel. I wasn't too happy with it, so I started again from scratch and came up with something much nicer looking. I find the speed of EEVEE and the rather complex material node trees it can handle in real time simply amazing. Just wait and see. It surprises me every time. Enough said, let's get going. Alright, let's go. This is Blender 2.80. And I don't need the camera. First, let's create something resembling a smartphone. Just go into edit mode, then delete this face. Select everything, scale C 0.1, scale Y 2. Alright, so we have this shape, and now we select all of these edges here, but not the ones on the bottom. Go N and go edges data, mean bevel weight, and set that to 1. And now we can add a bevel modifier, set to 6 for weight. Also maybe go in here and shade smooth. So we get this, and then we can turn this up to get this nice round. And that's about all I'm gonna do to create the back of this smartphone. This is not about modeling. This is about materials. So let's go over here, switch on EEVEE, and then over here we're just gonna do shader editor. Also, let's right away go in here and put in, not a gradient, an environment texture, open an environment, something from HDRI Haven, maybe like, I don't know, this one. Something with some interesting lights. You know what, a 3D view, go back, move this, turn it into an area light, square, make it a little bigger, just so we have more interesting lights in our scene, like this. And from front view, something like that. Okay. Now, shader, select this guy. First of all, I'm going to turn on the roughness to 0.1, and then I'm going to set clear coat to 1, so that we have a super shiny surface on top of whatever else we do with this material. But this now looks like a white phone cover or back. Okay, so now let's create some cool material. So first off, the texture here has these sorts of, you know, like stripes that are going down like this in a curved pattern. And on this side they go in like that. At least that's what I saw on some YouTube videos. I don't own a Redmi K20 Pro, but okay, so let's start with a texture, wave texture, because that gives us sort of these lines. I'm using Control Shift left click with the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, by the way. Okay, so they're 45 degrees, so Control T, and also turn down the size, so we have these sorts of bands going. I'm also taking the object for the texture coordinates here. Now there is a cool node here, which is the vector curves node, that can be used to bend our world basically. And with this we can, if I take this, and you can see we can bend our waves, our yeah, wave bands to go down like this. Now, okay, this doesn't fit anymore, so we have to maybe go to texture. Stretch this up a little with the texture mapping node here. And now we have these bands going this way, and we want bands on the other side as well, but I don't want to just mirror them exactly, because I want the right side to be slightly different. You know, the more a variation, the more randomness you get into your materials, the more realistic they look. And an easy way to do that is just to copy all of this, and also of this of course, and then look at that one. Something is not working. Oh, this is plugged into the wrong thing here. Okay. Scale. Now we can rotate this maybe. Let me reset the scale here. Like so. And then maybe rotate the whole thing so we have these on the left side and then these on the right side. And in order to have them not quite the same, I'm gonna change some stuff around here, 1.6, and then maybe also move this one down a little, maybe move this one up a little. Oh, this is weird. Okay, so now we have this one for the left side. You know what? I'm gonna switch on film transparent so that the background isn't distracting. And then this one for the other side. Okay, so how do we mix those together so that we can mirror them down the middle here? Well, like I just said, we need a mix shader. No, we need a color mix node. And mix this one and that one, and now we can use the factor. How do we get a perfect split down the middle to use as a factor? Easy. We just separate the x, y, z of our object coordinates. We take the x, which looks like this, but it gives us a gradient because this is all minus, 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 and from 0 to 1 we have this gradient. We don't want that, so we take a converter math and just set it to greater than 0, right? So we have black on the left, white on the right, and that's the perfect factor for this mix node. And now we have this texture on the left side and this texture on the right side. And since we're using object coordinates, this sticks to this object. So if I select it and hit RR to rotate it, you can see that all of this is now stuck to this object, basically. So down the middle, we're going to have this blacked out area anyway. I'm not going to worry about this right now. I'll do that later. Next thing I want to do is all of this needs to be red. The right one here could be a little bit more detail. I don't know, like this. You know, can play with that later. So let's turn it red, black and red. Well, easy way to do that is, let's say everything that's white here, we want to turn red. So I'll set this to ease and then set this to red. Wow, that's quite red. Let's turn that down a little. So now we have red. Okay. Now we need to get in some more detail into this pattern here. This is cool, but it doesn't have enough detail. So maybe we just duplicate this. Look at that. Maybe turn up the scale for more detail. Also bring in some distortion maybe. You know what? We could also take a little bit of distortion. Like I said, the more randomness and the more variation you get, the better. So now we have this and this one for the left side. We could take color mix those two together, and maybe what can we do here? Just take the difference here. What does that look like? Okay, and by playing with this scale here now of the finer pattern, we can create some detail here. And of course we do the same thing for the right side. So I'll take the same vector. Again, color, mix, difference. Where is the difference? Here. So this and that. Look at this output. And here we have to turn up the scale. Right, so we get something interesting looking. More distortion. Okay. Cool, now we have to move all of that way back, but not this guy, because we're gonna use these outputs now. For this effect, and if we turn it red, and it looks like this. So now, having this, you can spend a few minutes playing with these scales and with the distortion, and get nice patterns for this red back. By turning this up, we can take out some of the overall red color and just have more of those stripes. Maybe tuning this side a little. You know what? I'm gonna take the same settings 1.7 and 2.6 and then 4.5 and 3. 4.5 and 3. And it doesn't look the same because we have different settings over here. Okay, so let's just stretch this out a little. Something like that. Okay, so that's the red color. I also noticed in the videos that when the light hits the back of this phone, that sometimes you can see a little bit of blue, sometimes you can see purple. So I'm going to bring that in too. Just take another color ramp, turn this one all the way blue, and the end here to purple. And then I'm going to use the same mix. So we have the red, here we have the purple, but I'm gonna bring in another color mix node in the back here. And as a factor, I need something that changes according to the angle that we look at it, so that we get this shimmering effect in this, just for this blue purplish, because mainly we want it to be red. Okay, how do we do that? Well, an easy way would be to take some, let's do some texture coordinates, because here we get a reflection output. We can click through here to see the reflection output, and you can see that it changes when we look at it from a different angle. That's exactly what we want, but we can also pipe that through a layer weight. Take the facing output, turn down the blend, and then we get this. Now this looks like a reflection of a light or something. You know, looks like a light is shimmering. But I'm not changing the light, and I'm not rotating the object. I'm just looking at it from a different angle. So this is a cool effect to get a factor to mix in so that we get, you know, more shimmer or less shimmer depending on how we look at it. Now this factor is still way too strong here, 0.05. Now we get this nice purplish blue shimmer, which is cool. Also, let's just look at the red again. Maybe, what if we put in another node in here? And then another one in here to get more interesting detail in this pattern here. Yeah, you get the idea. That's how you can play with that. And also, I'm not gonna use mix, I'm gonna use hue for this mixer, so that I'm just mixing in this color hue using this reflection setup here, so that we get a tiny little bit of a bluish purplish tint when we look at it at an angle. So that's that feature. Now, of course, we can always go back here when we look at the actual principled BSDF, because then we get the nice reflections on top. So this is what we have so far. I think this is still too much red here, and we can play with that later. Now let's get this black bar down the middle in here so that we can get a better feel of what this actually looks like. Okay, how do we do that? Well, very similar to this setup here. You know what, I'm just gonna do another texture coordinate node. Separate the vector, separate x, y, z from the object so that it gets stuck to the object coordinates. So this is the x that we have. Now, how about we put in a math node set to multiply so that we can change our gradient a little with this multiply, and another math node set to absolute. Where's that? Here. So now we have a black bar down the middle. I don't think this value matters here, so we can turn this down. So okay, now let's play with this value here and also pipe it through a color ramp so we can bring out the black part a little better. Set it to ease maybe. Okay, so we want the outside here to be white and the inside here to be black, because now we can use that with another color mix node and just multiply that with a factor of 1 on top of our pattern, and then we have this black stripe down the middle. Okay, looking pretty good already. Now in the videos I also saw that depending on the angle that we're looking at the back here, there's also very fine brighter lines in here that sort of shimmer and glimmer depending on how the light gets reflected off of them. So let's try and get those in here. We just use the same pattern that we have here and take another color ramp. You already noticed that the color ramp is like the most used node in Blender anyway. Let's do something like this, turn this one black. So what I'm thinking here is, you know how I have this gradient, black and white or grayscale, coming out of this mix node here? I'm gonna use that as the factor and then just pick out fine lines. I'm gonna do that with this kind of setup here. So I get fine lines like that. Maybe do it again, but in a different location. Pick out another fine line somewhere else. So if I switch between this one and that one, I have two different types. And now I need to mix those together, again with a color mix node. And again, we need a cool factor to plug in here. Something that changes according to how we look at it. So we get that shiny, glimmery reflection effect again. Okay. Maybe I put something together up here. What can we do? Well, how about we do something a little bit similar to this. A setup down here for the purplish bluish tint, but a little bit different. I take a texture, noise texture, and when we look at that, we can see that we have colors in here. And I also have to use the object coordinates here. So this looks interesting. How about we use that? One thing you need to understand is we're always working with X, Y, and Z, which are just floating point values of coordinates. And colors have R, G, and B, red, green, and blue. And in Blender, the RGB colors are also floating point numbers. So wherever you have a vector, you can also plug in a color, or vice versa. So this color, when we look at this here, we could look at it as being a vector, or vectors. So this gives us sort of a displacement of bumps, this noise texture, when we think of this color as vectors. And if we take a displacement bump texture or displacement texture, going all wild like bumps and, you know, mountains and valleys, and we plug that into a layer weight node, then again we get this cool glimmering effect, almost like if it's a light reflection. Again, there is no light reflection here. This is just the effect of looking at these sort of fake mountains and valleys and taking the Fresnel value of that. You can also play with the blend again to get brighter and darker parts. Okay, this is cool already. How about we use that as the factor for mixing these lines and those lines. So mix those together, looks like this. And they change if we look at it from a different angle. But not very much. So detail, turn the detail down, turn the scale up a little maybe. By turning down the blend here, I get more contrast, I get brighter and darker areas. Okay, this is, what does that look like? I get too much of those lines and really not enough of the other ones. Okay, maybe I need another color ramp to increase the contrast here. bring that up and bring that down to be 100% white. Okay, what do we look like now? Okay, that's the Fresnel. Now let's check out what happens if we take the facing. Maybe this one is a little bit... This one also changes. See how the Fresnel effect doesn't really change when we look at it this way? It only changes down here. Okay. So let's take the facing. With more contrast. Maybe even more contrast, like so. So what do we look like now? Yeah, that looks pretty cool. Now we get a variation depending on how we look at it. And now let's add those bright lines on top of our color that we have here. Again, color mix. This is going to be our factor, this thing. And we're mixing this color with something. In the videos it looked like sort of like a peachy color. Something like this. Relatively bright. So looks like that. Cool. Of course, we have to flip that around because we want the black in the middle to be the last thing that we add to this. Right, so we mix this with the peach color. Can organize this a little here. Mix this with the peach color. Where is it? Peach color. And then we put this on top of the black bar in the middle. So we have this. Ah. Looking interesting. Okay. So far so good. Now, what else? One other thing that I did was to add on top of this another black noise texture. So let's take a noise texture, check that out. Scale 2. And I also want this noise texture to change when I look at it differently, so maybe this time I just take the camera for the vector, because you can see that this also means that stuff changes around. And pipe that again through a color ramp and bring up the contrast quite a bit here. Something like this. Turn down the scale so we have this cool effect going. Okay. And then again we take a multiply node. Oops. And multiply that on top of our color. So now we have those like more dark areas here, and they change when we move. I don't know if that's realistic, but I think it's a cool effect. And again, it adds variation and randomness. And especially for this kind of material, I think this looks pretty nice. Of course, this looks pretty nice with the glossy reflections on top of everything. Cool. And I think we're pretty much done. That's the node setup. It's a bit crazy, but it's not too bad. And we have this nice Redmi K20 Pro material. And of course we can always go in here, especially these settings here and the wave textures that we used here to create this, to, you know, fine tune the details here. But I think for this tutorial I will call this done. When I posted my quick test render, people also asked, how did you get this nice lighting? And let's just talk about, let's just talk about the lighting quick. You've already seen what I did. I only have 2 area lights in here, and you can see the reflections of those in here. And this one is over here. So that's basically all the lighting setup that I need for this. And the rest really comes from the environment texture. So you plug in an HDRI here and you get all these reflections. And there's some windows, I guess, in this HDRI. So you get indoor, outdoor. You get this warm light in the middle here. It gives it a realistic look just because of the reflections. And that's really all that we need this HDRI for in this case, since on this material we have the clear coat turned all the way up. Without the clear coat, this material looks like this. So we just see our color, and then we have the roughness here. And we could even turn the roughness up a little for the color part, and then get the clear reflections on top of that with the clear coat. Oh, that looks very nice. Okay, now, and the other question that I got was, how did I make this crazy camera move? Why do I keep clicking there? I want to go here. And that's also very, very easy to do. So if you want a camera to move around this and even be able to loop this infinitely, all you really need is some sort of curve that the camera can move on, and it has to be a closed curve so that you can loop it. And an easy thing to do is, I like this torus knot, for example. So we move that up to be above the camera. Maybe when we look at it from top, we scale it on the Y, scale it on the X, not so much on the C, maybe a little bit. Okay. Now go in here, take the bevel depth down to 0. I don't want to see this thing. I just want it to be for my camera. Where is my camera, by the way? Let's add a camera. I deleted it at the beginning. So now take the camera, go to constraints, follow path, pick that knot, animate the knot, and the camera is following this knot. Now we can look through the camera to see what the camera sees. This isn't very spectacular yet. First of all, we have to move up quite a bit. Maybe turn our render to be a square, for example, for Instagram. Oops, so we get this. And now we add another constraint to this camera, which is the track 2 constraint. The target is what is called cube, because that's our phone. And then up is Y. And let's see. Up is Y and minus C. Yeah. Okay, so now the camera is always looking at the phone because of that constraint, and it's moving along this path because of the other constraint. So maybe we do scale this up on the C a little so we get closer and further apart. Scale it on the X so we get more movement to the sides like this. Okay, now we have this crazy movement. And on this knot, on the curve here, we can go in here to the path animation. And let's say we want to render out 250 frames. And we also have to set this here to 250 so that the camera follows this path exactly once all the way around within 250 frames. So right here on frame 250, this is where the camera is, and then here it moves around, and on frame 1 it's in the same location. And that makes this camera move not only look cool and very easy to set up without any keyframes or without any of that stuff, and it's very smooth also because this curve is perfectly smooth. But also this is loopable because back here, if we jump back to frame 1, we can just keep going. So that's how you set up this camera. All that's left now is really to render this out. Of course, in EEVEE we switch on bloom because it helps. And now a little bit about the compositing that I did, because maybe that's also part of the question, how did I get this nice lighting on my simulation? Well, let's go here. Here we have some light reflections in the scene. Go over to the compositor. I always switch off backdrop. I know many people like it, but I don't. I'd rather have an image editor down here with the viewer node, so I can control shift left click on a node and see its output. I hit F12 quick to get a render in here. Now I have this. So let's put that onto a black background with a color alpha over. We put on top of black because we set the film to be transparent before. So now we can put it on any background that we want. Black is fine. And now lens flare. That's the only thing I really did, was a lens flare. How do we do that? Easy, just filter, glare, set to streaks, set the streaks to 2. Now I plug in I plug in this image that's already on black. So I get streaks going this way. Then I set the mix to 1 so I can see only the streaks. Set the fade up to 0.98 or something very long. And the longer you make that, the higher you have to set the iterations here. So you get nice long streaks like that. That's quite long, I have to say. I don't know, something like that. And then we take those, we put them through a filter, blur, fast Gaussian, relative, and blur it a little on the X. So we're just blurring this glare now. Maybe you can see that here. We get sort of these dots sometimes. That's from the color modulation. I like the color modulation, but I don't like those dots. So we can blur everything on the X a little, and then maybe just a tiny bit on the Y as well to get these nice lens flares. And color mix. Take the original image and add those lens flares with the blur back on top of them, and then that's what we get. Nope, I need to plug this in here. So that's what we get. Plug it also into the composite. So, because this gets rendered out to the file that we're rendering. Now we just have to set an output, PNG or JPEG or whatever. Save my blend file. And then go to render animation. And you can see we get the super fast EEVEE rendering. And then after it's rendered, the compositor kicks in, puts on the lens flares and the black background. and it renders super fast. It's about 1 second per image, and that includes the compositor. The compositor in Blender sadly is very slow, but you can do crazy, amazing, cool things with it. So, and then we let that render out and we're done. Oh, by the way, one other thing that I can show you here is, let me just stop this. Notice how we sometimes have quite fast jumps because of this fast camera movement. I mean, we could move it slower by just increasing, you know, making this whole movement around the phone here, not in 250 frames, but maybe, I don't know, 1,000 frames. So we get slower movement. That would look much nicer, of course. But one thing that we can look at here is motion blur. So let's see where we have a fast movement, right here. So in EEVEE, we do have motion blur, and we can switch it on here. But first of all, it only works for camera motion. So if you move your object around, you don't get motion blur in EEVEE. You only get motion blur when you move the camera, and you notice that there's no motion blur, although the camera is moving, and it's moving quite fast at this point. So what's the deal with that? Problem is, it doesn't work unless the camera is being moved using keyframes. Now we set up this curve and we set up this constraint to follow the curve and all of that so that we don't have to set keyframes. But if we want motion blur in our final render, and for movement like this, it really adds to the final quality of your rendering, then we have to bake this motion to keyframes. And there's a really easy way to do this in Blender. You just go select the camera, go to Object, Animation, Bake Action, start frame 1, end frame 250, and then you have to set visual keying, which includes, I don't know if there's a pop-up here, yeah, keyframe from the final transformations with constraints applied. So that's what you want to check, because the camera only moves because of the constraint. So if we select that, we hit OK, and now the camera went all the way over here, and that's because it still has that constraint on it. So we switch the follow path constraint off. The camera can now move with these keyframes here. So there's a keyframe now on each and every frame. Camera's still moving because of those keyframes, not because of this constraint. This is switched off now. The track 2 is still on, so that I'm not even sure. Oh, it also keyframed the track 2. Yeah, it keyframed position and rotation, so don't even need this constraint anymore. And now when we look here, we get motion blur in EEVEE in real time, camera motion blur. So let's go back to camera view, position 1, and save it, hit F12, and you can see that this is the result that we get. Oh, not F12. Render animation. I have tweaked some more things in the material setup and then rendered out this 750 frame animation for you to enjoy. I think the result of the material is quite nice, and someone on Facebook told me it is close enough to the real thing, so I'm happy with it. Don't forget, you can head over to my Patreon page and download this finished blend file. If you found this video to be educational, then please click that like button, subscribe to my channel here on YouTube, and browse through all my other Blender tutorials. Thanks for watching, Chris P out.